And now it's time for our panel discussion with conservation and national security experts. Rear Admiral Len Hering is Executive Director of I Love a Clean San Diego, a nonprofit focused on making San Diego environmentally conscious. While in the U.S. Navy, Rear Admiral Hering worked on issues such as renewable energy, responsible water use, and conservation. He's also a military advisor for the Center for Climate and Security, which is part of the Council on Strategic Risks, the entity that was responsible for the report mentioned by our sponsor today. And Monica Medina is the founder and publisher of our Daily Planet, cool-sounding publication, an environmental email newsletter. Her resume also includes time as the Deputy Director of the Environment Program at the Walton Family Foundation and Special Assistant to the Secretary of Defense, and she's been working on oceans, various environmental dimensions of this for a long time. I would dare say, Admiral Hering, I'm going to actually call you Admiral. The rear is the one that's getting me in trouble. I don't know, maybe it's my Japanese background or something. But in any case, it's great to see you both. You were both essentially doing conservation, worried about oceans, worried about the climate, worried about impact on lands and biodiversity, before it had become the DEFCON level that it is right now. Admiral Hering, what made you, I mean, you're a military person, what made you adopt this issue so early on in your career?
I think one of the things that really drove me to understanding what needed to be done was I served on the Joint Staff in the J3, was responsible for humanitarian relief and disaster assistance. In that part, I saw some of the issues and concerns that were happening on a global scale with regards to changes in our environment and how that impacted our security as a whole. Of course, the tsunami of post-Gulf War caused us to divert many of our forces to help in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. And we're starting to see some of those things. But more importantly, what I found when I was in the service and doing the jobs that I needed to do is that we weren't very responsible about how we were dealing with things. And when I was sent to be base commanding officer, I started to focus on the real issues that included energy, water, waste, and conservation. I became responsible for land, and my Boy Scout upbringing, leave no trace, started to really impact and force me to take a look and become that individual who said, you know what, we can do better. And I've just continued to champion that. I did that when I became a flag officer in the Pacific Northwest, started looking at the environment. And then when I came back down as the Southwest Regional Commander, really focused my attentions on making absolutely certain that the land that we were responsible for was being handled and done correct and taken care of correctly.
I mean, we'll come back to it, but I want to, kind of figure out how we turn you into a killer app or into a clone or, something of that sort. Monica, yesterday I had a conversation. It's really haunting me, so powerful, with the Undersecretary General of the United Nations for the Environment and Climate, Inger Anderson. And one of the tweets she sent out is just, I had nightmares about it. She said, we put our human weight each year in plastics, and they're in the water, they're in the oceans, they're in this. And it's just another side to this conversation that I think it made it very palpable and very real and tangible to me, the degradation of the planet as we think about it and what we're doing with our footprint. And so, Monica, I want to give you a tough question. I mean, if we had everything going in the right direction, if gravity was taking us in the right direction, we wouldn't be having to do this event. So my question is, how do we shift gravity, shift awareness substantially enough that you get scale to impact problems that big?
Thanks so much for having me, Stephen. This is a great event, and it's events like this that do actually help raise awareness, and that's why we write our Daily Planet every day. And I have to say, my own military background, I too started in the military. I was in the Army for 4 years, and I saw these issues firsthand as well from my time in the government, then at NOAA. These issues are really basic to people's safety and security, and they don't think of them that way. They think of it as nature and something natural and it's just happening. It's not. These are events, these are things that we are doing to our own planet, and it's in our control to change them. And nature really is our best defense. So if we can change the way we think about nature, not as something altruistic or something good to have or something nice, but as something essential to our very survival, we might actually then be able to get ahead of some of these problems.
You know, Monica, one of the things I've been thinking about, my brother is a beekeeper, right? And so we're all worried about the bees, the diminishing. You know, last episode of this series, we had Jane Goodall, and we talked a lot about, you know, the billions of birds that have disappeared. The scale of the challenge, I mean, that's what I want to, you know, tell our viewers right now. This is a big deal. I mean, this is a big deal. We can't pretend it away. And so in that range, you know, we have the United States government, but it alone can't do everything. But I guess the question is, when you kind of think about what the 2 or 3 biggest steps that we need to take that might get a course correction, an inflection point in awareness and behaviors that would help diminish the impact on biodiversity, say, I'd just love to hear what we should do, because I think a lot of people here would say, say, yes, so I watch National Geographic, I watch, you know, things like this. What do I do? So what would be the things that would be on your list?
Well, I think we can all use the power of our purse, the way we buy products, thinking about the products we want companies to make for us is very, very important. I also think it's the way we vote. And, you know, with a new administration that has made a whole of government approach to solving the climate crisis, to solving this pandemic. I mean, when we think about the devastation that this pandemic has caused in our country and around the world, with 2.5 million deaths and 100 million people who've been infected worldwide, that is the scale of a national or global security crisis. And I do think then even global leadership matters. And that's why people like the UN Secretary General saying as often as he has recently that these things are an existential crisis for the whole planet, that we will hopefully get people's attention. And you raised the plastic crisis. People are more aware now than they used to be. The problem is we need governments to come in and say, we need some substitutes for these products. We need to think about wasting less. There's lots that we can do as long as we raise our awareness. And it doesn't mean giving up our life of enjoying certain products or, the convenience of a water bottle from time to time. But we just need to think about our footprint on the planet, because if we don't, it will come back to hurt us and future generations.
It's so important. Admiral, the other thing, Chris Coons, Senator Chris Coons just went to Ethiopia. And there's a lot of trouble in Ethiopia. We have a lot of problems in Syria. There are a lot of problems down in Sudan. There are a lot of problems in Guatemala right now. And you look at the border down there and you look at a lot of the people coming to the United States. Guess where they're coming from? They're coming from Guatemala. And I guess, we see on CNN and whatever cable news network the outward manifestation. But what we haven't dug into is that oftentimes, climate and ecological disaster is at the base of a lot of this conflict and these zero-sum games and the displacement of people. I guess as a military person and as a strategist, how do we upgrade the seriousness of this? I know you get it, but I got to tell you, I know a lot of military officials that I would sit in a simulation. I would look like the liberal green guy who wanted to, bring a conventional topic into real security issues. How do we change that dynamic?
Well, I think one of the things that really has to happen is individuals need to understand the dynamics of the globe as it's occurring on a whole. So the first thing we have to deal with is what we have as a whole, and that is we need to understand that the Earth is in its fifth round of doubling. In the next 40 years, we are going to add another 2.4 to 2.7 billion people to the face of the globe. That is the equivalent of adding basically a new India and a new China. Right. We have climate security and the issues associated with the weather changes and how that dramatically impacts. And as you mentioned, Guatemala, 2 Category 5 hurricanes in the matter of 2 weeks displaced hundreds of thousands of individuals, changing the life and opportunity for prosperity in those regions least able to handle it to force the people. You've got millions of individuals in Syria, for example, who are suffering the consequences of dramatic temperature change in what used to be the agricultural region of of the Middle East, and it's now dry and desert. We have sea level rise. So we need to make absolutely certain that as we move forward, and the Center for Climate and Security has done an excellent job as a 4-part series, Climate Security Plan for America. How do we engage? How do we make sure that water security, food security, the basic hierarchy of needs are satisfied in our engagement in a more geopolitical positioning, so that we are making better decisions and being in front of and preparing to engage where necessary. Once a migrant, because of some of these issues, we're talking generational changes in the dynamics. You have 3.5 million people who are fleeing the Middle East right now on the southern borders of many of the EU countries. Poland shut its border, Hungary shut its border. They're trying to figure out how to reel in all of this mess. There's no way, if we are not more engaged in understanding how we are affecting this so that the changes can be made up front, that we're going to be able to handle this. And this is not necessarily just a U.S. issue. And I would contend that many of the instances that we're watching today, the things that are going on in the South China Sea and other things like that, the increase in the lack of biodiversity that's occurring as ocean acidification makes its way across our vast oceans, and the conveyor belt begins to slow down as temperatures begin to change within our oceans. They will have drastic effects on the security and the basic needs that individuals require, and that has to be part of our security.
Len,
it's the rule of three.
Len, Go ahead. I apologize. Go ahead.
3 minutes of oxygen, 3 days of water, and 30 days of food. If you can't provide that, then the whole dynamic of security changes.
I would just say, Len, the scaffolding you bring to this is so amazing to hear. I'm really learning a lot. I just love that you come prepackaged and pre-wired this way, and I just hope you go viral, is all I will say. But Monica, just before, we're going to take a question from the audience for the two of you, but I'm going to give you another unfair question. I've worked with your significant other on how to get people to look at the fact that innovation and innovation empowerment to do things aren't just a function of being in Silicon Valley or New York. Can be, in rural communities, can be. I guess I love the concept. I haven't been a reader yet of Our Daily Planet. I want to be. I love the idea that really how you get shifts, its scale is getting a lot of people to realize it. And I sort of, think your husband and others have been able to begin doing this around innovation is not just centered in certain parts of this country, that it is something everyone can do. I think sustainability and understanding about environment and our impact can be there too. And I was joking in a tweet earlier today, and I said, maybe with Our Daily Planet, we need some superheroes. But how do you get people to realize they're the superheroes in this story?
I think, there are great examples out there, and we tell those stories every day of people who are making a difference on the ground, who understand that this is about our future and our security today. So I am very optimistic about it when I read, what's happening, when I see what's happening out there in our country and around the world. But it does take consistent action. And it is really important that we have now Secretary Kerry, the climate envoy, is sitting in the National Security Council to raise these issues and make sure that they're at the table when our nation's leaders are thinking about our security. And I have to tell you, I've seen a big change in the last 10 years. Since I was at the Pentagon a little less than 10 years ago, I see a much greater awareness in military leadership, at think tanks, like the Center for Strategic and Information and Studies and the Center for New American Security. They're all looking at these issues now. Natural security isn't such an odd phrase any longer, but we can't stop there. We really have to continue to think of these issues as about our security, not just about our best interests, our values of beauty and the things that we love to experience. It's about our needs and keeping us safe.
This is a great conversation. I could take forever. I hope you're both going to commit to come back, because I'm not done with either one of you, but we've got a question from the audience. Healy Hamilton. Healy?
I'm Healy Hamilton, Chief Scientist of NatureServe. My question is about biodiversity data. Every one of the 8 pillars of action that are outlined in the report, The Security That Binds Us, relies on foundational data about the identity and the distribution and the conservation status of species and ecosystems. And yet there is no investment in the biodiversity information infrastructure that's required to manage and improve natural security. So what steps must be taken and by whom to address this fundamental data need? Thank you.
What an interesting question. Biodiversity, information, and infrastructure. Monica, your thoughts?
My thoughts are that we are at the point in time where we actually have the capacity to do this, to put sensors on all kinds of things that never carried them before. The ocean is particularly challenging. You know, fish move and they're underwater. We can't see them. So the more we can collect data, the better. And at NOAA, my old agency in the government, we used to do a lot of that. But that will help us immensely. And the questioner was exactly right. These are not big investments. They don't cost nearly as much as an aircraft carrier. And we can get an awful lot of good defense information out of collecting this kind of information and then using it to create a much better understanding of the way we're impacting our environment.
Len, your thoughts as well?
I agree with Monica. I mean, I think that there's so much that we can do. The defense does engage in a very large portion of what is required, but it's limited in its scope because its primary job is defense of the nation. But the biodiversity and those type of things within our facilities, for example, they became a cornerstone of our protection, if you will, of military assets to create biodiversity within our base, so that we could actually say, you know what, we've returned this to a protected state. Therefore, we don't have to worry about encroachment of our facilities. We created, in the time frame that just I was the Southwestern commander, we created 23 plans that protected the biodiversity in and around our bases. It's the most plans between the Navy and Marine Corps, and I'm absolutely certain that it's happening virtually across all services, and that we are taking a look at how to do that best. We're engaging in biofuels, we're engaging in renewable energies. Those are all types of things that can help protect and make sure that we're being actively involved. I think we need to do more, but at the same time, we are doing a lot more, as Monica said, a lot more than we did 10 years ago or even 15 years ago when I first got engaged. It was a different story to where we are today. And I'm sure under the current administration, we'll get some better results.
Yeah, look, we're out of time, but I'm going to take a little because I'm so interested in this question and this issue. But I think that the one question I have is, you know, Len, you came out of the Pentagon. Monica, you were in the Pentagon, but you were also at NOAA. And again, you know, this may totally infuriate our underwriters. We'll see. But, you know, one of the things I've been looking at, you know, for instance, is the digital divide. And they've begun to map where we don't have connectivity, particularly for young people, kids around the country. But it took mapping, right? If you look at NOAA is a, you know, system that looks at maps and data and sensors along the line. You know, the question is whether we need biodiversity mapping and whether we need an institution, you know, potentially in government, partnered with the private sector, that actually we need to create that capacity. Part of today is to ask ourselves, does this threat rise to the level where we have to build institutions and to do things around it? But is that a crazy idea, Monica?
It's not crazy. It's a great idea. And lots of people, I think, would get behind it. We've had efforts at this, like at the National Geographic, they do a Citizen Science Day every year where people go into the national parks and collect that kind of data. But we could be doing this every single day. If every fishing vessel all around the world carried sensors and collected data, think how much more we could know about what we're taking out of the ocean, our critical food source. So there's just any number of examples, and it's really inexpensive compared to trying to fix what we break. So it's absolutely essential.
Well, I
actually think it's.
Go ahead, Len, please.
I'm sorry. I just think it's critical. I attended a presentation a couple years ago in which I found out that in my lifespan, more animals, flora, and fauna have gone extinct than in the past 1,800 years. And if we don't recognize that that is something that we should all be scared about, then how else do we do this? And if we're not protecting and being able to create environments where that biodiversity continues to exist, then all of this is for naught. We need to be more scientific about how we approach this.
Well, listen, I want to thank you both. Monica Medina, publisher of Our Daily Planet, really appreciate your thoughts. Len Hering, Rear Admiral, I finally got that out right, member of the advisory board of the Center for Climate and Security, and I think executive director of I Love a Clean San Diego. I should also say San Diego is one of the places that I regularly fly to, fly off to, hibernate at, go to. So we'll have to look each other up there sometime. Thank you so much for sharing your candid thoughts. This is a great discussion.
Thanks very much.